equity, and inclusion policies implemented under the Biden administration that the State Department must reform to meet America First foreign policy objectives. I now recognize myself for an opening statement. Good afternoon and welcome to the first hearing of the Subcommittee on Oversight and Intelligence in the 119th Congress. As we start the new Congress, I am looking forward to working with the colleagues to deliver real results for the American people by advancing President Trump's America First policies and agenda. Over the next few months, through our State Department reauthorization deliberations, this subcommittee will work to identify areas of the Secretary's office or the S Bureau that must be reformed and reprogrammed to reorient the United States as a leader on the world stage while ensuring that taxpayer dollars are effectively used to bolster U.S. national security efforts. For far too long, the State Department prioritized radical liberal political ideologies and woke policies over advancing diplomatic objectives that serve American interests and protect the American people from our adversaries. While the Biden administration was trying to figure out what pronouns to use, our adversaries grew stronger and more emboldened. China aggressively enforced unlawful territorial claims in the South China Sea and has undermined the United States and our allies at every turn. Russia invaded Ukraine, North Korea ramped up its military provocations, Iran advanced its nuclear weapons and ballistic missile programs, empowering its proxies to now cause chaos throughout the entire region of the Middle East. Israel was attacked, and global shipping routes in the Red Sea was blocked. Over the last 4 years, among others, the American people watched these foreign policy failures unfold and voted for real change and action on November 5th. The American people gave President Trump and the Republican-led Congress a mandate to reverse the damage and restore common sense to our federal government. Today, this subcommittee will take its first step to deliver on this mandate by examining the State Department's Office of Diversity and Inclusion. The Office of Diversity and Inclusion detrimentally influenced operations across the State Department by making DEI a core precept for promotion considerations within the ranks of the Foreign Service, granting passport applications the ability to select X as a gender, and using taxpayer dollars to fund numerous woke projects, including commemorating Black Consciousness Month with an event in which employees learned about the inclusive Afro-Brazilian culture through music and LGBTQI+ culture through Vogue dance in Brazil. That was a mouthful. These policies corrupted the core mission of the State Department, and we must restore unity and fundamental American principles to the department, eliminate wasteful spending, and ensure that President Trump's executive orders are fully implemented, not subverted by rebranding DEI-driven programs. It is our duty to ensure that Americans become safer, stronger, and more prosperous. I want to thank our witnesses for appearing before the subcommittee today, and I look forward to productive discussions on how we can enhance America's security through common sense policies and responsible leaderships. The chair will now recognize my good friend and ranking member, the gentleman from Florida, Representative Moskowitz, for any statements he may have.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, and thank you to the witnesses for testifying at today's hearing, the first Oversight and Intelligence Subcommittee hearing for the 119th Congress. First hearing as ranking member, and it is also nice to be here with my friend and colleague, Chairman Mills from Florida. Florida had a good day yesterday with the Gators win. I would like to spend a few minutes focusing on the title of this hearing: Deficient, Enfeebled, and Ineffective. If I didn't know any better, I thought we would be talking about Trump's tariffs that were just put in place. In fact, if you listen to Elon Musk talking about the architect of the Trump tariff, the mastermind Peter Navarro, Elon calls him a moron. He calls him dumber than a sack of bricks. And then Elon apologizes to the sack of bricks because he thought he offended the sack of bricks by comparing them to Peter Navarro. I was looking forward to a meaningful discussion of our current foreign policy discussion, but the trend continues in this Congress. We don't want to do any oversight of the current administration or examination or discussion, even though that is kind of the point of this subcommittee, but instead we're focused on looking backwards, Biden-era policies. So we're going to talk about DEI. Newsflash to my colleagues across the aisle: you won, we lost. This was one of the issues on the ballot. There's an EO has been signed, DEI has ended, but yet we're still going to look backwards. Oddly enough, there were some of the programs and objectives that you rolled back that you also had in place during the first Trump administration that promoted diversity and inclusion. You know, there's this movie Spaceballs. I'm a big fan of this movie Spaceballs. There's a scene when Colonel Sanders and Dark Helmet are talking, and Colonel Sanders says to Dark Helmet, he says, "You're looking at now, sir. Everything that is happening now is happening now." And Dark Helmet says, "What happened to then? We passed it. When? Just now. We're at now. This is the present, okay? And not a single one of my colleagues want to talk about now. They want to talk about then. They want to talk about the past, okay? What I want to know is when will then be now? Soon, perhaps? Our witness today, Ambassador Gina Abercrombie-Winstanley, has experience on the ground in some of the most sensitive regions of national interest and extensive involvement in our national security apparatus. I want to welcome her and the other witnesses here today. The ambassador, after her term to Malta, served as the Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer at the State Department. And I'm sure she'll be able to provide more detailed insight into the programs that the Trump administration has begun dismantling. You know, one of the things I want to talk about and end with here in my opener, Mr. Chairman, is that it is a bipartisan objective, Democrats and Republicans, to talk about what's happening with China. We had a China Select Committee that was very bipartisan, but my colleagues seem to be undermining that effort because of what the freezing that has gone on with foreign aid. Any member who has traveled around the world and met with world leaders, met with ambassadors, knows every time the United States removes a dollar from foreign aid, every time we withdraw and create a vacuum, China is coming in and is developing and making more friends than the United States, having more leverage, having more influence. We want to fight Belt and Road. Well, we can't withdraw. We can't isolate. And what's been going on within the State Department, what's been going on within the administration is absolutely against what we're trying to accomplish on China. These tariffs that the president is putting in place on China, well, the other piece to that is to isolate China from the rest of the world at the same time, but we're not. And we're fueling other countries to turn to China, to run to China as we withdraw our foreign aid. America first can't be America alone. And that's where we're headed with the current policies of the administration. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Ranking Member. Like yourself, I was also a bit confused whenever we talked about deficient, enfeebled, and effective. I thought we were talking about Biden's entire administration over the last 4 years. But I'll also remind our Ranking Member that in order to understand the mistakes that was made in the past, we have to resurface and rehash these issues so that we can prevent them from occurring in the future, not just continue to make the same mistakes over and over because we didn't learn from them. Other members of the committee are reminded that opening statements may be submitted for the record. We're pleased to have our distinguished panel of witnesses before us today on this very important topic. Mr. Simon Hankinson, I apologize if I mess up anyone's name, is a senior research fellow at the Heritage Foundation. Mr. Hankinson has served as a Foreign Service Officer in the State Department for over 20 years, and thank you for your service. Mr. James Rogers serves as a senior counsel for the America First Legal. Prior to joining America First Legal, Mr. Rogers was senior litigation counsel at the Solicitor General's Office of the Arizona Attorney General's Office. Mr. Rogers also serves as a Foreign Service Officer in the State Department for 6 years. Thank you so much for being here. Ambassador Gina Abercrombie-Winstanley served as the Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer for the Department of State under the Biden administration. This committee recognizes the importance of the issues before us and is grateful to have you here to speak with us today. Your full statements will be made part of the record, and I'll ask each of you to keep your spoken remarks to 5 minutes in order to allow members time for the questions. I now recognize Mr. Hankinson for his opening statement.
Thank you, Chairman Mills, Ranking Member Moskowitz, members of the committee. The views I express in this testimony are my own. My only prayer for the future of diversity and inclusion is that we invest in and nurture talent no matter what they look like. That was actually Snow White actress Rachel Zegler, and it's one thing I agree with her on. Diversity is great when it comes from fair competition and individual choice. Equity should mean equal opportunity and equal treatment. Inclusion is good when it's possible. But in life, variables beyond the control of organizations result in disparate outcomes. Critical race theory says disparate outcomes are caused by unseen forces like structural bias or systemic racism. And for proponents of this theory, equity means ensuring equal outcomes, so they rig the system to achieve it under labels like DEI. But professions and skilled trades need standards. When I go to the doctor, I want one who got A's in biology. I want them to have aced the MCAT and gone to a rigorous medical school. When I get on a plane, I want pilots who are selected because they're good at math, spatial reasoning, and keeping calm in a crisis. When I call 911, I want them to send a police officer who knows the law and can catch a criminal, or a fireman who can lift an average person. There are two ways to get diversity in selective professions. You can educate everyone to a high standard and let them compete, or you can discriminate to get the sex and race percentages you want. And in trying to make the U.S. Foreign Service look like America, the State Department chose discrimination. If you want the analysis, the data, the charts, I've written several long reports which are available online. But there's no systemic evidence of bias at the State Department against favored minorities. The sad truth is that the American education system is failing to deliver a pipeline of potential recruits that is as racially diverse as our country. Only 30% of 8th grade students in the U.S. are proficient readers. In 2023, not a single child tested proficient in math across 67 schools in the state of Illinois. In 2020, the Smithsonian Museum wanted us to believe that hard work is the key to success and work before you play were aspects of white culture. That would have surprised my friend Taitusi in Fiji, a successful builder, and it would have been news to my friend Kojo in Togo, who gets up at dawn every day to run his coffee farm. I've lived 10 years in Africa, 4 in Asia, and 20 in Europe. The values that make people succeed are the same the world over. The reason our schools fail is because we let them. Economist Roland Fryer's research on charter schools showed that success is not about teacher pay or iPads or class sizes. It's teacher feedback, data to guide instruction, tutoring, increased instructional time, and high expectations. So with strong families, homework, discipline, no phones in the class, and high expectations, we could fix our schools. That would increase the talent pool. That would allow diversity to occur naturally in competitive fields. But instead, the State Department, like so many other institutions, has decided to achieve its diversity goals by lowering standards. And meanwhile, in our foreign policy, rather than following its own joint strategic plan and concentrating on the values at the heart of the American way of life, the department has pursued a leftist agenda. The Biden State Department's Equity Action Plan contained the word equity 113 times, but equality appeared only 7 times. Under former Secretary Blinken, the State Department offered grants to promote transgenderism in India, drag performances in Ecuador, LGBTQIA+ awareness in Botswana, a gender and sexuality library in Lebanon, and DEI training for police in Latin America. Blinken's U.S. aid promoted gender-affirming medical care, although other developed countries have banned it for minors. They conflated conversion therapy with any effort to help young people accept reality. And at the United Nations, U.S. diplomats fought to replace sex with sexual orientation and gender identity, and women with women in all their diversity, which is code for allowing men to self-identify into women's spaces and compete against women in sports. Woke ideology is dug in. Consultants are making millions writing and advising about it. Institutions will resist or rebrand. At NASA's Jet Propulsion Lab, they kept their DEI chief, but renamed her from Chief Inclusion Officer to Chief of the Office of Team Excellence and Employee Success. At California Institute of Technology, they promoted their Assistant Vice President for Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Assessment to Associate Vice President for Campus, Climate, Engagement, and Success. New titles, same old jobs. Discrimination is discrimination, whether you call it affirmative action or DEIA or belonging or engagement or success or excellence. Hiring people because of how they look and not what they do is wrong, and it's also illegal. The State Department's guiding principles at home must be equal opportunity, fair treatment, high expectations, and accountability. And in foreign policy, the focus must be on enduring American values. Thank you for inviting me today, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much, Mr. Hankinson. At this point in time, we'd like to recognize Mr. Rogers for his opening statement.
Chairman Mills, Ranking Member Moskowitz, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for the invitation to testify. I'll be summarizing my written testimony. First, to acknowledge the positive, my testimony is about the Department of State's failures under prior secretaries. Things have already markedly improved under Secretary Rubio, and I'm confident the problems I outline can and will be addressed under his leadership. I served as a State Department Foreign Service officer for 6 years. My experience during President Trump's first term showed that the department has an entrenched culture focused on opposing him and punishing anyone who exposes this. Shortly before my consular tour in Brazil in 2017, President Trump rescinded Obama-era requirements focused on fast visa interview speeds. Instead, he ordered the department to focus on thoroughly vetting visa applicants. However, the Minister Counselor for Consular Affairs for Brazil, Doug Conniff, ignored these orders and imposed an even more aggressive standard than what President Trump had rescinded. My direct supervisors, Consular Chief David Franz and Deputy Chief Kelly Kopswell, also directly disobeyed department directives about slowing down the interview process to give officers enough time to vet applicants. I blew the whistle about this. The department investigated and confirmed I was right. Soon after, apparently in retaliation, Franz filled my employee evaluation with false negative statements that led the department to deny me job tenure and schedule me for separation. While preparing a grievance against this, I discovered the same problems were happening worldwide and that more thorough visa interviewing would likely decrease visa overstay rates by 50 to 75%. This means that out of the 1.8 million visa overstays during President Trump's first term, malfeasance likely caused 900,000 to 1.4 million of them. To put that in perspective, 10 U.S. states have populations of less than 1.4 million. Thus, consular managers subverting President Trump's policies managed to add an entire state population's worth of illegal aliens in just 4 years. The department's Office of the Inspector General ignored my complaint about this. The Office of Special Counsel also rejected my complaint, incorrectly claiming that it was secondhand information. Yet at the same time, the intelligence community's IG was investigating secondhand allegations from Alexander Vindman that formed the sole basis for the impeachment of President Trump. I also submitted a complaint to the OSC for whistleblower retaliation, but 7 months later, when my grievance was nearing resolution, the attorney assigned to investigate my case had never even started investigating. Eventually, I won my grievance, but the department made the process as painful and drawn out as possible and hobbled my career in ways I would never recover from. It became clear I had no future there, so I left. This experience shows that first, department employees believe they can disobey the president's lawful orders, and they often get away with it. Second, the mechanisms designed to stop wrongdoing and protect whistleblowers do not work. In my current role as Senior Counsel at America First Legal, we've discovered more problems. The department started assigning diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility scores to employees in 2022 and using them to make tenure and promotion decisions. Anecdotal evidence suggests these scores were used not just as an Orwellian way of enforcing ideological conformity, but also as a pretext for discriminating against white males. One department employee was reprimanded by his supervisor and penalized in his DEIA score because he declined to volunteer his free time to help at an LGBT pride festival outside of work hours. But the DEI hysteria did not stop there. When he applied for onward assignments, he was almost always required to describe his efforts to promote DEIA. Only the 2 posts that did not seek this information accepted his application for an onward assignment. Thankfully, the new administration has eliminated these DEIA scores. However, the bureaucracy continues to discriminate against employees in other ways. For example, a diplomatic security special agent has been the target of a nearly 5-year-long witch hunt because he posted traditional Christian symbols and prayers to his personal social media. Department officials reacted to these innocuous posts with baseless allegations that he was a white nationalist and a right-wing Christian associated with violent extremism. This agent has been selected for promotion 3 times over the last 5 years, but the department refuses to promote him because of the pending investigation. This sort of pretextual attack driven by ideological extremists within the department must stop. Those involved in this weaponization of government must be held accountable. These specific cases are emblematic of a more widespread problem in the department's culture that festered during the Biden years. Through Freedom of Information Act requests, AFL has uncovered diplomatic cables that detail the extreme ideological bias in Blinken-era department programs that sought to indoctrinate citizens of other countries into supporting divisive left-wing causes. These Biden-era DEIA programs spread unwanted divisive leftist ideology to foreigners, driving resentment against our country, making it harder to achieve legitimate foreign policy goals that actually would improve Americans' lives. President Trump's order removing DEIA from the government is already having a positive effect. However, the department should also retroactively reevaluate everyone denied promotions from 2022 to 2025 without using DEIA scores and then give promotions with back pay to those found worthy. More generally, because there appears to be a persistent pattern of bias in tenure and promotion decisions, employee evaluation should exclude anything that might allow a reader to infer an employee's race, sex, religion, or other protected characteristics. Additionally, to better protect whistleblowers, there must be reforms to the department's grievance system and how IGs and the OSC handle complaints, which I've detailed in my written testimony. Thank you, and I welcome any questions from the subcommittee.
Thank you, Mr. Rogers. I now recognize Ambassador Abercrombie-Winstanley for her opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Ranking Member, members of the subcommittee. I want to thank you for the opportunity to join you here today to address some of the misconceptions around diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility as characterized in the title of this hearing. I come from a family of proud public servants. I have 3 siblings, an older brother who served in the Army, a younger one who is a submariner veteran, and a sister who is a retired Navy captain. But I'm the only one who faced a terrorist attack while serving her country in the Middle East. During 30-plus years of assignments in the State Department, I stepped up to challenges in Cairo, Jakarta, Baghdad, and the Gaza Strip. Because of the stellar record and more, I was selected as the first woman to lead a diplomatic mission in Saudi Arabia. America got to show her best leaders come from all backgrounds. So when called on to go to one of the most conservative nations in the world as a working mom with a young family, I was honored to go. And when terrorist threats required my family's evacuation and separated us for 18 months, I stayed. My presence conveyed a powerful testimony about the rights, capabilities, and patriotism of women without uttering a word. Even so, the most challenging assignment that I took on in my 30-plus year career was to support my colleagues, all of them, as Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer for the department, CDIO. Why do the hard and too often misunderstood work to ensure America's representatives represent the breadth and complexity of our nation? Well, as Secretary Rubio said at my first hearing as CDIO, not only is our nation's diversity our strength, but if our workforce doesn't reflect our population, then it merits inquiry. So 3 reasons. We aim to create a system that ensures the very best rise to the top. There's no difference in this administration's stated goal of a merit-based society and the goals of the DEIA effort that I oversaw at the State Department. And we worked to address behavior that too often led to EEO complaints. 2, we wanted to save taxpayer money. It takes hundreds of thousands of dollars to train and ship around the world highly talented and highly trained representatives. When talent leaves early and takes those skills with them, America loses. The department has lost valuable talent, perhaps like the gentleman next to me, because they lost faith in the system. And 3, we have to walk the talk. In order to remain a great power, America's word must be trusted. We've told the world we believe in a level playing field, and our history of service and achievement, from Nobel Prize winner Ralph Bunche, the Tuskegee Airmen, Navajo Code Breakers, and Dr. Samar Attar show the world what we are capable of. And don't forget, the DEIA unit got its start under President Trump, and I thank him for that. But President Biden understood that we needed a larger effort to tackle well-embedded cronyism. Common sense tells us to deal successfully with the world's issues, it's not enough to tap a few viewpoints, a few backgrounds, few experiences. We need diplomats who can connect and engage with the range of humanity. Foreign service officers advocate for America's priorities at community centers. Government buildings, yes, but factories, remote border crossings, and farms and town squares. And let me be clear, every change we made, every effort we undertook, every data point we gathered was cleared by our lawyers. The Department of State has some of the finest and most conservative lawyers in the government, and I can confidently say that we followed the law and the intent of Congress. There were no so-called DEIA hires, and anyone who says otherwise is misinformed. Our focus was to dismantle cronyism, bring transparency, and build trust. So let me talk about a few of the programs that we started. Our method of assigning most diplomats is to have a bid list where everybody can see what assignments are open, but in a key position, the Deputy Assistant Secretary position was more secretive. Those positions weren't advertised or competed. You had to be known to the Assistant Secretary or someone in the Assistant Secretary's circle. You had to have the right connections, be in the in crowd. And because of this opacity, only certain people even knew that the position was open and available. This cronyism was far from meritocracy. And the Office of Diversity and Inclusion led the efforts to ensure that these positions, like others, were advertised and openly competed. Is this something that the American people would want to see turned back? This transparency? And I can tell you the first recipient of that DAS position under this new system was a white male. He wasn't the only one, but he was the first one, because inclusion means everyone. Another priority was to bring transparency and fairness to the assignments at a lower level. We brought strong business practices to improve our selection processes. We brought in standardized questions and panel interviews, something that business has been using for years, but the Department of State had not. And one of my favorite changes was modeled on the U.S. military culture, something I heard from my siblings all the time. We've got your back. My office worked with key stakeholders in the building and our embassies abroad and host governments to put a stop to widespread harassment and discriminatory treatment to some of our diplomats from various agencies at embassies overseas. Many reported being stopped, questioned, detained, even harassed by government officials in a way that would be illegal in the United States. Sometimes the diplomats...
Madam Ambassador, your time
Yes.
is up.
All right, you see I'm excited about these programs.
I am as well. Well, thank you, Madam Ambassador.
Okay.
I now recognize myself for 5 minutes. You know, I want to go over a couple of things that you just made mention of. You talked about inclusivity means everyone. Can you tell me how doing an actual event which is only tailored towards a certain gender or a certain sexual preference or a certain racial bias is in some way inclusive of all, as opposed to just saying that everyone is welcome?
Mr. Chairman, when you say doing a certain event, are you talking like
Let's
a
just
Black
say, for
History
example, an
Month event or Women's History?
LGBTQI event. Do you think that's inclusive of every individual, that they would feel that that's something that they want to partake in?
So I believe that it is a learning experience for people who don't belong to that group. That's why
But again, I'm
affinity
asking,
groups-
it's not about learning. We do that a lot. So I work in the
Yes, you
Foreign
said,
Service
is it
as well.
inclusive?
And I know for a fact that we learn about cultures. We learn about regions. We learn about the idea of not just cultural exchanges, but also what are some of the actual norms that you can actually learn about that allows you to be a better diplomat so that you can engage with them, because sometimes people are a little more vague and ambiguous in how they say things, but it's a cultural issue, not that they're trying to evade the question. So I understand that portion of it.
Okay.
But what we're talking about is inclusivity means everyone.
Yes.
So when you section off particular groups, do you think that that is inclusive when you're trying to tailor money to only go towards those particular groups for particular events?
The point is to bring in underrepresented groups. That is why, and we have the statistics. GAO's done reports for many years that show we have underrepresented groups in the Department of State. Therefore, while we hire for merit only, we do have to recruit in a more focused fashion for different groups. People
But
are
don't
in
you
different
believe, though, that meritocracy should be the only merit in which you're actually judged upon or that you're graded upon?
Yes.
Shouldn't matter any other factor other than who is the very best at being able to do a job. And I don't think that, having served in the United States military for a number of years, I don't think once did I look to my left and right and say, gosh, I sure hope that he knows his pronouns. Gosh, I sure hope that he has this background and culture. Gosh. No, I said, I hope that he's the absolute best warfighter that we have who's standing to my left and right. And it's the only thing that I cared about. As I fought with a gentleman who was from Cambodia, who lived in LA, a man from Brooklyn, a man from Lombard, Illinois, all of which the color of their skin didn't matter. We all wore green. And that actually matters, more so than any other diversity, equity, inclusion, which has been nothing but a divisive tool. But I will ask this. Can you please outline how much money did the department allocate to fund the Office of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion every fiscal year?
Every fiscal year. At the beginning, my first year, our budget was about $2.2 million. By the time I left, it had grown to about $7 million, and these figures are, you probably have access to them already, of course. There were other programs throughout the building that might have fallen under the rubric of what the Department of State always use, which is recruit for diversity, but we hire for merit. There were no DEIA
And can you just
hires.
explain to me, how did this funding advance American interests overseas? How did this funding support the actual toppling of the Iranian regime, who was brutally murdering and torturing people like Mahsa Amini? How did this diversity, equity, inclusion prevent the Houthis from increasing attacks that disrupted 12% of global trade, the unfreezing of assets that led to a continuation of proxy funding? How did DEI and the office within the State Department help our overseas security and national security interests?
Sure, if I may.
Please.
As I mentioned in my remarks, and as we all know from the 1960s, our reputation matters. That's how we build allies. That's how we build support.
And trust matters, right?
I beg your pardon?
Trust. Our allies must trust that we're going to be there,
Trust,
right?
but that we are going to.
Just like Biden showed trust when he withdrew us from Afghanistan, abandoning so many of our SIV and others who fought alongside us for 20-plus years for political reasonings.
I believe that was a great harm, and I understand that that harm is continuing even now with the SIVs, that they are not able to come to the United States now, which is not good. But if I may answer the question that you asked, our reputation of being a country where merit counts, where if you work hard, you can achieve. And that means all of us going and showing the world that all of us are able to benefit from our hard work is important. It does help our foreign policy.
Well, I agree that hard work matters, especially as a person who grew up in a broken home where my dad spent 32 years in prison, my mom spent 7.5 years in prison. It was riddled with drug addiction and other substance abuses. Hard work is what matters. Hard work is what got me here, and why our socioeconomic background shouldn't define us as individuals, and we shouldn't, divisively try and identify people by anything other than the best and the hardest working. With that, I'd like to now recognize my ranking member, Mr. Moskowitz, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm actually going to go to Madeline Dean first for questions, if that's okay.
Recognizing the gentlelady, Madeline Dean.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Ranking Member. Thank you to all of you for coming to testify today before this Subcommittee on Oversight Foreign Affairs Committee. I'm touched by your comments there, your personal comments. I don't know if you know this, but a passion of mine is dealing with learning more about addiction. I have a son in recovery from opioid addiction, 12.5 years. But we know too many people who don't have that kind of outcome. So I'd like to work with you on that. Thank you. I'm going to start with some words. Pete Buttigieg once explained DEI as a set of opposites. The opposite of diversity is uniformity, he said. The opposite of equity is inequity. The opposite of inclusion is exclusion. The values and principles of our country are not uniformity, inequity, and exclusion. That's not the America I know, nor is it the America I will ever fight for. Mr. Chair, is the committee aware of who is President of the United States today? Donald J. Trump. It's not Joseph R. Biden. This backward look on a topic of DEI is such a misuse of our time. It's a misuse of your time. The role of this Foreign Affairs Committee in oversight is important, yet Republicans have decided that relitigating the Biden administration is a better use of our time. I disagree. Because oversight is important, there are plenty of actions by the current administration that warrant oversight. Here are just 3 examples. The illegal shuttering of USAID and the subsequent spread of disease, death, and starvation of children deserves our oversight and our attention. 2, the National Security Advisor's irresponsible and likely criminal use of Signal, and apparently many, many times, as well as Gmail, recklessly compromising our own national security and a military operation, as well as intelligence officers and military personnel, boy, that deserves congressional foreign affairs oversight. Number 3, the incompetent and incoherent use of massive tariffs, even on our allies, especially on our allies, deserves congressional oversight. It is the largest tax hike on Americans in peacetime since World War II. We should be taking a look at the loss of $11 trillion in 11 weeks by this president who inherited an economy that was the envy of our allies. And while this president weaponizes tariffs against our allies, they continue to show respect to our country. They continue to show respect to our country, but the president does not show respect for theirs. Lithuanian leaders, think of this, you saw this, it was so moving. Lithuanian leaders and citizens gathered to give our 4 fallen American soldiers a dignified and honorable farewell as they sent them here to the United States. But where was the commander-in-chief? He canceled his attendance at the dignified transfer of the bodies of 4 American soldiers who tragically died in Lithuania. Well, after all, he had a couple of golf games to go to, $1 million a plate fundraiser for a PAC that supports him, and I guess a few tchotchkes, Trump tchotchkes, to sell along the way. Don't attend the return of our fallen heroes. Who exactly was he raising the money for? I'm not really sure. Certainly not the American people who are suffering massive losses in their retirement, in their attempt to save money for their kids' education, in their attempt to pay for everyday goods. But here we are talking about DEI under the Biden administration. Are you kidding me? This is a farce. I apologize that you are here for this farce. You should not be. As qualified as you are, this is not what you should be talking about with us. I regret the waste of your time, the circus that this is. As you might imagine, I am utterly outraged. Today's hearing is unserious and unworthy of this committee. It reflects poorly on those in this room who decided to convene it, and I want to be sure that is on the record. Mr. Chairman, I yield back with a simple question. Who is the President of the United States?
Well, I think it's very obvious that the American people unanimously decided to elect President Donald J. Trump, but I will remind the gentle lady from Pennsylvania that all last Congress in the 118th, all I heard about was the Trump derangement syndrome of Trump, Trump, Trump. But yet you want to talk about the 4 bodies. Let's talk about when Joe Biden was checking his watch while they were offloading what was his responsibility and his failure on August 26, 2021,
96
when we
members,
lost 13.
96 members have been returned. Donald
Ms.
Trump
Dean,
was there for
Ms. Dean,
4.
I reclaim. Ms. Dean, your time is over.
To enter some documents in the record.
Without objection.
Let me just
So
tell you
ordered.
what they are. I'll enter into the record FY22 NDAA, which had bipartisan support, including Secretary Rubio, who was an original co-sponsor that explicitly endorsed promotion of DEI. Number 2, the Secretary said, quote, the Secretary shall implement performance and advancement requirements that reward and recognize the efforts of individuals in senior positions and supervisors in the department in fostering an inclusive environment and cultivating talent consistent with the merit system principles, such as participation in mentoring programs or support sponsorship initiatives, recruitment events, and other similar opportunities. I'll also note for the record the bipartisan statement from Representatives McCall and Meeks in 2021, applauding the NDAA's focus on strengthening management operations of the Defense Department of State by recruiting and retaining a diverse workforce. I'd also like to enter into the record 2 articles from The Atlantic that I'm sure everyone here is familiar with regarding the National Security Advisor's use of signal. They are by Jeffrey Goldberg. Number 1 is Trump administration accidentally texted me war plans, for the record. Number 2, here are the attack plans that Trump advisors shared on Signal. And the final, Nick Kristof, New York Times, talking about exactly the cost of shuttering USAID, the millions around this world who will lose their lives. With that, I yield back.
Okay. I appreciate it, Ms. Steen, but I will just go ahead and say, while you were mentioning Senator Rubio, now Secretary Rubio, while you were mentioning Chairman McCall, no longer Chairman of the Foreign Affairs, and Ranking Member Meeks, I'll ask a question that you asked me to make it easier. Who is the President of the United States right now?
Donald Trump.
At the directive of President Trump, DEI is something that we will be eliminating, but we will enter your documents to director,
Your peril.
and I genuinely look forward to working with you on things like substance abuse and addiction issues.
Let's
It's
do it.
something that is not studied enough, as well as for mental health, which is a key thing. And I will point out and recognize a Marine, Carl Castillo, who just took his life last week. We definitely need to do more. And it's not just continuing to issue out more pharmaceutical drugs
No.
for our service members.
I look forward to working with you on that.
Likewise.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
With that, I'd like to recognize at this time the gentleman from Illinois, Representative Schneider, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I want to associate myself with the words of my colleague from Pennsylvania, Ms. Dean. The world's on fire. Russia is consolidating gains in Ukraine. China is testing red lines in the Pacific. Iran proxies are active across the Middle East. And now, just yesterday, the Trump administration announced it has opened direct talks with Iran. That's a major development, one with implications for the regional stability, for nuclear proliferation, and for U.S. deterrence. This subcommittee, focused on oversight and intelligence, is precisely the place we should be asking about these issues and asking tough questions. What are the administration's objectives? What is the intelligence shaping this approach? What are the risks? What are our allies being told, and how are they supporting us or challenging us? But we're not doing that today. In his opening remarks, the chair appeared to claim that it was DEI policies that was responsible for Russia's invasion of Ukraine, Hamas's invasion of Israel, China's actions in the Indo-Pacific. I don't think he believes that, but that's what this hearing seems to imply. I'll use my military language. I won't. I'm just going to say we shouldn't be doing this. I was going to. Yep. So we're holding a hearing instead to relegate the past administration's diversity initiatives at the State Department while Tehran and Moscow coordinate and Beijing expands its influence. What are we doing? We're attacking internal HR policies, attacking them with some absurd, I have to say, absurd arguments, gentlemen. This is not serious foreign policy oversight. It's a political sideshow. And it's a profound abdication of the responsibility we hold in this committee as members of Congress. To be clear, I don't defend every initiative of the previous administration. I didn't then, I don't now. I raised concerns publicly and privately. But at least their efforts to broaden recruitment and strengthen retention at the State Department were aimed at building institutional capacity, strengthening America's capacity to perform diplomacy and development around the world, making our country more safe and more secure. That's more than I can say for what we are doing today. This hearing has nothing to do with confronting our adversaries. It has nothing to do with securing American leadership in a dangerous world. It has everything to do with scoring short-term political points and earning the favor of the gentleman at 1600 Pennsylvania. At a time when our credibility, our alliances, and our deterrence posture are on the line, we should be focused on the hard work of oversight, asking hard, challenging questions, reviewing classified assessments, holding this administration accountable for the real decisions like was made or at least announced yesterday. Instead, this committee is looking inward, picking fights with civil servants, and dangerously wasting the moment. This isn't leadership. This is abdication. And I want to pick up on something else that my colleague said. She quoted former Secretary BOTCHED, diversity is uniformity. And I'm going to argue that uniformity is a threat to what we are or who we are trying to be as a nation and our diplomacy. And I'll ask any of the two gentlemen, I'll read a quote and see if you share a concern I have about this. The quote is, quote, "The Department of State specialists on Near East were almost without exception unfriendly to the idea of a Jewish state. Some thought the Arabs, on account of their number and because of the fact that they controlled such immense oil resources, should be appeased. Some among them were also inclined to be anti-Semitic. I want to make plain that the President of the United States and not the State Department is responsible for making foreign policy. Do you agree with that, Mr. Hankinson?
Absolutely, the President of the United States is in charge of foreign policy.
Mr. Rogers?
Yes, I agree that the president is in charge of foreign policy.
Ambassador, do you know who said that by any chance? It's a trick question.
I think I do know who said it, but I'll say no.
It was President Truman.
Okay.
President Truman was talking about the Arabists in the State Department because at that time we had uniformity in our State Department. Uniformity in thinking, uniformity of experience, oftentimes uniformity in education. The reason we promote diversity in our diplomatic corps, from the most senior ambassadors to the most junior foreign officers, is because we need their experience, we need their perspective. And if we go down a path where it's not just merit, merit counts, it's imperative. But if we only say merit is the only thing, then we end up with a State Department that looked like it did in the 1940s. That's not what we want. We want a State Department that is prepared for the challenges of the 2025s and the century ahead, with a rising China, a threatening Iran, and a threatening Russia. We need these diversity programs to bring in people with a variety of perspectives, a variety of experiences, and a variety of ideas. And so I resent the idea that we should all be thinking alike or looking alike or following the same path. We need to challenge each other.
Time is over.
I yield back.
And I do appreciate a lot of your sentiments and a lot of the comments. I agree with you. The president is responsible for foreign policy, and there is no debate on that whatsoever. President Biden's responsible for the increase in Iranian aggression, for the defunding of many of the programs that were working, for Russia's continual focus whenever he wouldn't actually authorize lethal aid. It was President Trump who actually authorized lethal aid for the Ukrainians. It was President Biden who actually delisted the Houthi rebels that's disrupted 12% of global trade.
Are we extending
And
time for debate?
I'm happy to.
Okay.
Because at the end of the day, October 7th in Israel would not have occurred under President Trump because there wouldn't have been $10 billion in unfrozen fungible assets, or was it now 1.7 billion barrels per day. Under President Trump, it was 500,000 barrels per day. When you talk about the illicit oil and ghost ships that are going. And look, I'm happy to have foreign policy discussions. We can go as far back into the Ottoman Empire expansion from Suleiman all the way up to 2011 when we talk about the Arab Spring and uprisings. I spent 10 plus years. It'd be a little bit long hearing. But I spent over 10 years in the Middle East, deployed in multiple locations. Foreign policy I do care about. But what I also care about is the strength of the State Department, the same way I care about the strength of the armed services, which I know you do as well. And when I talk about, and Mr. Hankinson said it correctly, I don't care what my heart surgeon looks like. I care about whether or not he or she is the best at what she does. So when you say that if we only base it on merit, that's a mistake. I disagree. I think having the best and the brightest, regardless of what they look like, is the only thing that should matter.
So I appreciate that. There was a time when merit was defined as, did you have an Ivy League education? To get that Ivy League education, you had to come from the prep schools of the East Coast. Right? Having the experiences, if I had more time to talk to the witnesses, I would ask the ambassador why it's important that we have people who can relate to the experiences and perspectives of the nations we are sending them to represent our nation.
And by the way, happy to give a second round of questioning should you want to ask that.
I'll wait. I'm here.
At this time, I'd like to acknowledge my good friend, our ranking member, Representative Moskowitz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And in fairness to the chairman, he is by himself here, so he is pulling. He's
Yeah,
doing,
but the good thing is that there was 9 of you, it might be a fair fight.
Okay, he's pulling the duty of his whole committee. So, and first let me say, Mr. Chairman, we appreciate your service to the country and your continued commitment to folks in the State Department and going to other countries during times of need. I mean, you have been there. What we're saying, many things we're saying is like, look, we didn't agree with the Biden administration on many things. There were many things that we didn't agree. And we had these hearings already. These DEI hearings were occurring for 2 years when you guys had the 118th. But at least when we disagreed with the Biden administration, we were like able to say it. You can barely find a Republican who's willing to come out and disagree with the current administration. At least in the House, I mean, a couple senators have come out and talked about the tariffs. I barely can find a Republican to come out and talk about the tariffs. I mean, can you imagine if President Biden did anything that caused the stock market to go down 7,000 points? I mean, they would show like 500 pictures of different basements trying to find out where President Biden is, okay? You know, there is a lot to talk about of what's going on right now, a lot to talk about, right? And Republicans should feel okay to defend those things. If they believe in them, then they should be able to defend them. But there's not a single committee, subcommittee or main committee talking about anything that is going on now. It's all backwards. It's all looking backwards. I mean, you know, the president came in and said, we're going to solve the Ukraine war on day one. That hasn't happened, right? That war's still going on. In fact, Putin is the one who just turned down a ceasefire, right? We should be talking about that. We had battle plans, attack plans, whichever adjective, verb you want to use, leaked on Signal. We talk about trust with our allies. I mean, that undermines trust with our allies. We have tariffs. We're tariffing friend and foe alike, the whole world. That undermines trust and credibility. And that doesn't mean that there isn't bipartisan support to try to fix supply chain. As someone who was the emergency management director during COVID, our supply chain is broken. Democrats and Republicans in the Trump administration and the Biden administration spent $8 trillion after COVID, didn't fix anything in the supply chain. And so, yeah, we do need to figure out how to onshore some of our manufacturing back. But the execution of this is crazy. I mean, that's why you're seeing people within the Trump administration fighting with each other in this Peter Navarro, Elon Musk stuff. You're seeing some of Trump's ardent supporters, billionaires, coming out and attacking the administration. Everyone understands we got to onshore jobs, but to tariff the whole world at the same time, to crash the stock market when that was clearly going to be a repercussion, these are things we should be talking about. You know, there was a lot, and you know how I like boards. I bring boards sometimes. You know, when President Zelensky came to the White House, right, to talk about trying to bring the conflict to an end, we heard a lot about what he was wearing. Oh my God, the precious Oval Office. He didn't wear a suit. I mean, here's a picture of Kid Rock in the Oval Office. He looks like he's about to jump over 10 buses, okay, when he's done on the White House lawn, okay? So, like, give me a little bit of a break. Okay, we can put that down now, I think. I think that picture solves itself. But, you know, what else are we talking about, right? Oh, Canada, they're going to be the 51st state. I'd love to have a hearing on that, right, to figure out how many people want to make that happen. By the way, if Canada were to become the 51st state, it'd be the last time we had a Republican president. It'd be the last time the Republicans ever controlled the U.S. House of Representatives, because between California and Canada, you'd have a lot more Democrats. We heard that we're all going to vacation in Gaza. I mean, are you guys excited to go vacation in the Riviera of the Middle East? You know, we've been treating Canada and Greenland for the first 3 months tougher than we were treating Iran. I'm glad now that we're focused on Iran. I'm glad that we're moving strategic resources there. It is an opportunity to talk about Iran. But we've been tougher on Europe for the first 90 days than we were on Tehran. And so there are lots of things that we can be talking about, Mr. Chairman, things that we haven't yet talked about, things that Republicans should feel comfortable in defending if they believe in them. But we're going back to hearings we've already had, not just in this committee, but a number of committees. And so that's why we're bringing it up. Mr. Chairman, my time has elapsed, and I yield back. Thank you.
Thank you, Ranking Member. We will now go to a second round of questions. I will just state for the record that in order for us to move forward as a nation, we must understand the mistakes of the past. And while this is just our first hearing, I think it is apropos for us to go through the past so that our next hearings can focus on how do we actually resolve key issues. But we did talk about oversight. The role of oversight is also how taxpayer monies, us as good stewards, are being utilized. And I think that we have seen where the offices of DEI, utilizing the 2 million and 7 million and 10 million and continuing to go up in numbers, could have been better spent on things that we all care about. stopping the Iranian regime from nuclear power and allowing it to be a democratically elected free Iran, stopping Russia's aggression, making sure that it's territorial sovereignty, and stopping China's continuation of its advancement towards a one-nation unification towards Taiwan. So I'm with you 100%, and we all share that sentiment. At this time, I'll recognize myself for 5 minutes. Mr. Hankinson, can you please outline the impact that DEI policies have had on recruitment and retention across the State Department?
On recruitment, we've essentially, we can debate what the term DEI hire means, but we have changed the way in which people come in. Instead of, you have to pass the written, then you take the oral, and then 10% of the people pass the oral. Now, you don't have to pass the written. They'll dig into that bucket with this holistic, or whatever you want to call it, character review, just like the universities do, so that they can get the right percentage. Then they put them into the oral after they've gone through this thing called a qualification evaluations panel, which again looks for personal essay, personal narrative, things that they can find to boost the right percentages, and then they pass 50% in the oral. So it's changed. I would say it's rigged the system to provide results that they want, as opposed to just judge people according to their abilities and merits. And so we've ended up with, and I take the point about diversity of viewpoint, I think is very important. Unfortunately, we've reduced the diversity of viewpoint, and we very much have a more left-wing State Department than we did back in the days of Truman and even 20 years ago. As far as morale, look, one side always wins when you rig a system, so I imagine they feel better. But the other side loses, and that's why, as Americans, it's always been so important that we judge each other not according to those immutable characteristics, but by the things that are more important. And I would say that has suffered in the past 5 years.
Thank you so much. And this whole rebranding of DEI, Mr. Rogers, Mr. Hankinson, in what ways could DEI initiatives continue under a different name or office within the State Department?
They can just, we've seen this happen in multiple government agencies and private corporations. They just change the job title of the person administering the program. They can rename the existing programs, but keep the same content of the programs and the rules that are applied. They can, like I said, change position titles, and then they can put DEI concept into other programs that you wouldn't know that they'd have done it, because based on the name, you wouldn't be able to see it. This is a real persistent problem, is that sort of attempt to burrow it in and hide it in other places.
And what kind of protections, Mr. Hankinson, do you think that we should implement to ensure that DEI initiatives cannot just simply be rebranded under a different name?
It'll be difficult because they're pretty embedded, and a lot of people believe in them and do very well out of them. But I think one thing is oversight about where the money goes. The number I heard was more like $40 million over the past 2 fiscal years spent on DEI and related programs, because you have to count things like paying a trainer $10,000 to come and talk to people about microaggressions. So I think that stuff has to go, the things that are divisive. And then one suggestion that I have is to change the recruitment and the promotion process so that you eliminate all of the obvious factors that you can tell about somebody, like their sex and their race and so on, so that you can judge them on how they did their job, how well they speak the language, how many times they've been to the region, and so on.
And just for the record, do you feel that since implementing the DEI officer, or DEIA, that the State Department has become more effective in their diplomacy efforts and in securing U.S. national interests abroad?
I believe in metrics, and I believe in proof, and the science. I don't see any metric by which you can judge that we have gotten safer, more prosperous, or more effective as diplomats as a result of spending this money. And I've seen some research that shows the exact opposite, that in fact morale and distrust and general sense of well-being among employees has gone slightly down.
Mr. James, or Mr. Rogers, I'd love to hear your response as well.
There's this saying, politics stops at the water's edge, that was popularized after World War II. There's a reason for that. It's because when the department's not just the internal DEI programs, it's this promotion like we talked about in my testimony. The department's been promoting these DEI ideas all over the world. And that doesn't make us safer, because it's taking very divisive, contentious political issues we don't even agree on internally and trying to indoctrinate the rest of the world. The Foreign Service shouldn't be a missionary force to promote a certain ideology. And that encourages resentment among foreigners who don't accept the same cultural values. There's this whole idea from President Wilson of self-determination, and that just completely disrespects that principle that other countries should get to determine their own path forward rather than us dictating it to them.
And Madam Ambassador, I'd be happy to hear your comments as well on whether or not you think that our U.S. national and security interests were advanced in areas in the Middle East to help with stabilization as a result of DEIA?
Yes, I think they were beginning to be strengthened because we were walking the talk. And there's a reason that businesses, as well as others, change the titles but continue to do the work. That's because they know the value of the work. That's why there are companies like Costco, like Coca-Cola, like ELF that continue with these programs because they know that it's good for their customers and it's good for their workers. It's good management. If one of the programs I've listed for you is one that you would like to see go away, adding transparency and accountability, these are the things that we were working on to make a more inclusive and accountable and trusted organization. And I would be surprised to hear my colleagues suggest that there shouldn't be transparency in assignments or promotions.
My time, unfortunately, has expired, but I believe that rebranding and rechanging the name is just trying to be tricky. With that, I'd like to recognize the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Schneider, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, and thank you for giving us the chance to ask questions again. Mr. Rogers, you talk about the United States promoting ideals or values. Should the United States be promoting democracy around the world?
Yes, it should promote democracy, but democracy doesn't include promoting DEIA.
I'm just asking, should we be promoting anti-corruption around the world?
Absolutely.
Okay. Mr. Hankinson, we've talked about as the State Department's changed, what percent of the senior ranks in the State Department are white?
I couldn't tell you exactly, but
If you were
what I
to
will
guess,
say,
is it more or less than 50%?
it's of the senior ranks, it's probably far higher than 50% because they were recruited in the 90s when the recruitment was not the same as it is today.
82.4%. So, you know, what's changed?
America's demography's changed. In 1990, it was probably 80% European and 12% African American, and the rest, Hispanic and Asian. And now the numbers of Hispanics are far higher, Asians are far higher, and so you will see a change in the recruitment. Also, women, I believe, are now slightly over 50% of new recruits.
Ambassador Abercrombie-Winstanley, you've served in the State Department for a long time. You've been a diplomat around the world. I'm going to give you the rest of my time. Can you talk about why it is so important, two things, that the people who travel across the world to represent our nation reflect who we are as a nation, and why, as people see that, they appreciate that the people who are in those countries have an appreciation for the nuance and distinctiveness of each of those countries?
Absolutely. Thank you, sir. I know from my own personal experience, the surprise when I have walked into rooms representing the United States of America, the reaction of me being part of a delegation. Oh, you Americans, you talk about this, but you're actually doing it. You're a U.S. diplomat. And it brings us credibility as a nation that has said for centuries that everybody can come here and reach their full potential. That is what DEIA is about, trying to level the playing field so that people get as far as their abilities will take them. That is the message that we've been giving the world, and we have to show that diversity to be taken seriously. And people are watching us now as well, because we did make the case successfully about leveling that playing field. Again, the Department of State recruits where all of our different populations are in the nation, and we do live separately. People say Sunday morning is the most segregated time of the week in America. So we are in different places. So we have to recruit in different places, but we hire for merit. You have to pass that written exam until we made the changes, and keeping in mind that the written exam is very similar to an SAT test. Those sorts of questions are not what determine whether you're going to be a good diplomat. That's in the oral assessment, the assessment when we're asking people hypotheticals about situations that have happened with diplomats. That is where the rubber hits the road. And I've been an assessor, so I'm very familiar with all three sections of this exam and the difference, and my colleagues will know this because they've been through both. They know what that written test is, and they know what the oral test is. So these are the things that help us get all of America through the door and out to the world. Languages, firsthand experiences with different cultures, my ability to blend in the streets of Cairo were what got my Arabic so good, and my ability to do negotiations in the vernacular, to do interpretations. When Governor Sununu came to Egypt, I was the one that was his interpreter for meetings. Those are the sorts of things that come because we have all Americans represented, and the world is watching us. We cannot give up on this, and people will continue to do it. They'll call it something else, but it's good leadership, it's good management to take care of all of your people, not just the ones that remind you of you or that you have something in common. They went to the same school as you. Take care of everybody. That's inclusion.
And I'll add one thing with the writing test. I was an engineer undergraduate. Writing was not my strength. I know that if I was going to get into a career and succeed, I had to learn to write. But if I could get in the door, I would have the chance to gain those skills and use my other skills that come naturally to succeed. That's why we have to balance how we evaluate people, not with a standardized test, but with evaluations of what do they bring in the full package. I yield back.
Thank you so much, Mr. Snyder. I'll just point out the fact that there's a difference in equity and equality. And the difference is one believes in equal opportunity, the other one believes in equal outcome, and that is not merit. And I will say one more time that it is important for us to understand the history and our past mistakes in order to try and advance and move forward to guarantee we have a stronger diplomatic corps, to make sure that our armed forces have everything they need, because none of our adversaries are scared by the ideas that we can he, him, she, her, they, them, or outpronoun them as we walk on to the battlefields, whether that be militarily, diplomatically, or economically. And I can tell you that the Ayatollah in Iran is not sitting there worrying about our diversity, equity, and inclusion. They're worried about the fact that this is the strongest nation on earth. I want to thank the witnesses for their valuable testimonies and the members for the questions. The members of the subcommittee may have some additional questions for the witnesses, and we will ask you to respond to these in writing. Pursuant to committee rules, all members may have 5 days to submit these questions and extraneous materials for the record, subject to the length and limitations. Without objection, the committee stands adjourned. The chair may declare the subcommittee in recess at any point. The purpose of this hearing is to identify divisive diversity, equity, and inclusion policies implemented under the Biden administration that the State Department must reform to meet America First foreign policy objectives. I now recognize myself for an opening statement. Good afternoon and welcome to the first hearing of the Subcommittee on Oversight and Intelligence in the 119th Congress. As we start the new Congress, I am looking forward to working with the colleagues to deliver real results for the American people by advancing President Trump's America First policies and agenda. Over the next few months, through our State Department reauthorization deliberations, this subcommittee will work to identify areas of the Secretary's office or the S Bureau that must be reformed and reprogrammed to reorient the United States as a leader on the world stage while ensuring that taxpayer dollars are effectively used to bolster U.S. national security efforts. For far too long, the State Department prioritized radical liberal political ideologies and woke policies over advancing diplomatic objectives that serve American interests and protect the American people from our adversaries. While the Biden administration was trying to figure out what pronouns to use, our adversaries grew stronger and more emboldened. China aggressively enforced unlawful territorial claims in the South China Sea and has undermined the United States and our allies at every turn. Russia invaded Ukraine, North Korea ramped up its military provocations, Iran advanced its nuclear weapons and ballistic missile programs, empowering its proxies to now cause chaos throughout the entire region of the Middle East. Israel was attacked and global shipping routes in the Red Sea was blocked. Over the last 4 years, among others, the American people watched these foreign policy failures unfold and voted for real change and action on November 5th. The American people gave President Trump and the Republican-led Congress a mandate to reverse the damage and restore common sense to our federal government. Today, this subcommittee will take its first step to deliver on this mandate by examining the State Department's Office of Diversity and Inclusion. The Office of Diversity and Inclusion detrimentally influenced operations across the State Department by making DEI a core precept for promotion considerations within the ranks of the Foreign Service, granting passport applications the ability to select X as a gender, and using taxpayer dollars to fund numerous woke projects, including commemorating Black Consciousness Month